Hey guys, Carl from Perte Plays. Today I'm going to be taking a look at the prototype of the upcoming game Once Upon a Line from designers William Aubert and Dan Thouvenot and coming to the US from publisher Lucky Duck Games. This is a sort of story narrative campaign game that's set in a sort of future post-apocalyptic world that's been ravaged by disease in which insects have developed into these giant versions of themselves and humans are starting to find a way to live amongst these giant insects. In this game, you sort of play the role of sort of godlike being, taking on some of these human personalities and using them to try and save the world. And you're doing so using a very unique sort of word search mechanism that is something like I've never seen in any other games before. Let's head down to the table to see exactly how this game plays, and then I'll meet you back up here to let you know what I think. Since the dawn of time, you, the Zephyrimes, have watched over the great balance in secret. When tragedy threatens to plunge the world into chaos, these superior entities intervene by taking control of those with enough power, sometimes called heroes. As a Zephyrime, you must work against fate and try to deflect the hardships yet to come. Each of your choices will create either glory or tragedy in the story. Before we get started, I should mention that this is a prototype copy of the game, so all of the components that you see in my playthrough are prototype components, and it's very likely that some things will change between now and when the production copy comes out. Also, I've been given access in this prototype to a sort of tutorial mission and then the prologue mission. The prologue mission is the first mission of the actual game that you will get in the box when it comes to production. So that means the prologue game itself does offer some spoilers for the game, and for that reason, I will be doing just a recording of the tutorial so you can get an idea of how the game plays without spoiling any of the content that will be in the base box when it comes out. With that said, let's go ahead and get everything set up. To set up a game of Once Upon a Line, begin by taking the grid of destiny for the challenge or for the chapter that you are going to be playing. In this case, we are going to be starting with the tutorial, so we will use the grid of destiny for the tutorial. And this is the grid of destiny. You'll see on one side is this grid, and this is basically what we're going to be playing with for most of the game. And on the other side is a story and sort of a setup stuff. So let's go ahead and read the story first, and then we'll go ahead and get into setup. It says, the month of August is in full swing. The honey harvest has already begun. Iria is very proud of her bees. They've been very prolific. Just like every week, the young swarm keeper has to go to the city of Kel to deliver her honey samples to the analysis laboratory. But today, Iria is lagging behind, and the evening is fast approaching. Sirvin, who was supposed to take over at the shelter, has not yet returned. The journey becomes more and more perilous with each passing minute. With nightfall comes many terrifying nocturnal insects. So there's a couple of things you'll see here. You'll see this is our inventory. We don't start with any inventory. Pellets are sort of the income or the sort of money of this game. Again, we don't have any of that to start. We'll be sort of noting things here as we unlock things or get things. And up here it tells me I start with Iria as my starting character, and we get A002 and A004 as our sort of starting cards for our character. So I'll pull those out in just a minute. But also here you'll see our main quest is to get to the city as quickly as possible. And down here then it says turn over the board and scratch off any of these arrow squares without using any of my action tiles. And I'll explain what that means in just a second when we get into setup. But for now, let's turn the grid over and place it down here on the table. Next, we're going to set up both our character and the sort of cards that we're going to need for this scenario. Again, we are playing the tutorial. The game comes with this sort of box, which is also storage during, while the game is in the box. But we've got this sort of wooden divider piece that goes inside this box that has the same slit that the box has. And then using that, we can take the deck of cards that's associated with this tutorial and they'll slot right in there and sit very nicely. Now I understand that's not ideal for the camera, but this is just holding cards and it does make it easier for me to sort of fan through the cards to find what I need. So for right now, we'll leave it like that. If I need to move it around or change things so you can see it better on camera, I will do that. Again, the card or the grid on the back showed us that we should take cards A002 and A004, and these are going to be our character cards. So we're going to turn them over. And this is the character we will be using for the tutorial. Her name is Iria. It says, at barely 25 years old, the skillful Iria loves open spaces and adventure. She's a gifted swarm keeper amongst the Opiloptera and has earned a reputation for being as adroit as her protégés. For 2 years now, she has been secretly hoping that the handsome Sirvin will make the first move. So we're going to take this sort of stand here, and we'll put our character in that stand. Again, I know it's not ideal for you to see on camera. The cards are a little bent from me playing with them, but I'm going to set it off like that, and we will move things around as we need to, as I said. But most of the gameplay is going to be inside this tray, and I'll explain that in just a second. But for now, card A004 are these potential sort of power-ups that Iria can get throughout the game, and that is gifted, skillful, and adroit. And if you were paying attention, those are the sort of all-cap words that were in her description. You'll see later in the game that these all-cap words are going to be words that we're going to be searching for, or words that are meaningful in gameplay. So I'll set that right here, and we'll come back to that when needed. Then to finish setup of our player board, we're going to be placing one of these blue zone tiles in her player board like this. And we will be starting with 5 standard action tiles. One of each size, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That look like this. Again, these are standard action tiles. They are all straight line, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'll explain how these work as we get into gameplay, but we're going to start with these 5 as our available action tiles. So we're going to put all of those up here in the top of our player board. And then finally, to finish, set up as was explained on the back of this card. Without using any actions, we're going to scratch off these arrow spaces. Now, this is sort of the main mechanism of this game. This is a storytelling game that's got a sort of word search feel to it. And it comes with this scratching tool. And we're going to use this scratching tool to scratch off squares on this grid, searching for words. But to begin with, we're going to scratch off those arrows. So I'm going to go ahead and scratch those off. All right, so we've gone ahead and scratched. You'll see, unfortunately, because of the production quality for the prototype copy, now this is the second time I've played the tutorial, and the first time I played it, the card didn't have this issue, so it might be this card specifically, but it didn't come off super cleanly. But you should be able to see that we've scratched off the word dwelling. And you should also see at the start of the word here and at the end of the word here, there's a line. And there's always going to be a line at the start and end of all words. So we can see here at the top of the E, there's another line, which means some word must be ending with that E. And I'll explain how that works in just a minute when we get into how the actions are going to work. But for right now, because we found a word, a complete word, that has a bar at the end, at the start and the end of that word, we're then going to draw the card that has the first 3 letters of that word. So I need to find the card DWE in this box. Here it is. Let me go ahead and read that card. And it says, dwelling. Night will soon fall in the valley of sequoias. You slip on your flight suit and you're ready to go. As you pass through the door, you whistle for Hexa, your pet honeybee. The rascal is nowhere to be seen. Her behavior has been a bit strange recently, and she has begun wandering farther and farther from home. It's very likely that she's wandered off again, perhaps hiding in a wild colony, or maybe she's dozed off in a secret cache. Now you'll see there are 3 big words here, or 3 capitalized words: honeybee, colony, and cache. That means those words exist somewhere in my grid, and we will be able to find them at some point. The words that are underlined here mean that they interact, or they directly connect at a 90-degree angle with the word that got us this card. So somewhere, coming off of this word dwelling, we must be able to find colony and cache. And to do that, we're going to take our actions. And we have the ability to do 4 actions before we need to reset. And to take an action, we choose any number of these tiles. And you can see, I hope, that the tiles have an arrow on one end and a straight line at the other, which means for the same action, we could connect an arrow like that to extend how long we are acting or using on that action. And we're going to place that out on our grid. It needs to connect to one of the orthogonally adjacent spaces next to the word or next to a word that we've already found. It can cross across a word, means it doesn't necessarily need to go next to a word like this. We could overlap the word that we're using as our anchor like this, but we can't ever go sort of parallel to a word that we've already discovered unless it's connected 90 degrees to another word that we've already discovered. We can't ever just scratch something off in a random location. And if we start to find a word that we haven't completed yet, I cannot build a word off of that word until that word has been completed. So we either want to try and start a new word or continue a word that we've already started. And again, those words have to come off at a 90-degree angle from one of the words that we've already discovered. So I can see that I'm looking for the word cash, and I can see that I've got an E that's the end of a word right here, which means I know that cash has 5 letters, and I can see that there are 4 spaces before that E. So I can imagine that this is probably C-A-C-H-E. So I'm going to use my 4 action tile, placing down like this from the E, and we're going to scratch down like that from the E. And then we're going to place that tile to signify that we've taken that action, and then I will go ahead and scratch that off. And again, I will apologize that these are not scratching as cleanly as they did. I'm not quite sure why the one that I did in preparation for this video is scratched perfectly fine and this one is not. But I hope you can see now, we did find the word cash. But at the bottom of this C is not a straight line. At the bottom of this C is a sort of curly bracket, which does indicate the end of the word. So we have discovered a word, but it doesn't get us a new card. Instead, you'll see here on this card, anytime we find a word that has one of these curly brackets on one end, we're going to use the letters in that word, if possible, to cross off letters here. And if at any point we can cross off all the letters in one of these words, we then will activate that power for our character. So with the word cash, C-A-C-H-E, we don't have any C's in here. I do have an A in adroit, so I'll cross that off. I don't have any H, and I do have an E in gifted. So we're going to cross off that A, and we'll cross off that E. Now we also know that we're looking for honeybee, but that honeybee has no underline, means it's not connected to this word, so we'll probably find that later on. But we also need to find the word colony, which means it could intersect with this L, it could intersect with this L, or it could intersect with this N. So from this N, above the N would be O-L-O-C and a Y at the bottom. Those L's would be O-N-Y down below. So I think I'm going to start my next action just using a single one. Sure. Underneath this N to see if there's a Y in that spot. Because if we know that there's a Y in that spot, we can then scratch upwards from that spot to find the rest of the word. So let's do that. And unfortunately, no, there is nothing in that spot as empty, so we chose the wrong place. So it's going to be one of the 2 L's. And after the L in colony would be 3 letters. So let's take this 3 and we'll put it, let's say this middle, this separated L, so I'm not next to one of the other things for right now, although I could be. I'm going to try this L and see if we've got an O-N-Y there. Now I should mention, when we are scratching, and I haven't done this yet, but when we are scratching, I should be scratching just 1 square at a time. Because if we ever find a hand symbol under one of the spaces, we instantly stop and the rest of our action is forfeit for that turn. Or if we ever find a skeleton or a skull symbol, again our action ends there, the rest of the action is forfeit, but we would also need to cross off one of these hourglass tokens. And these hourglass tokens are going to sort of be our timer for the end of the game, and they're also going to give us sort of negative points at the end of the game if we take too long or if bad things happen along the way. All right, so we're going to take that 3 action and we're going to scratch down, which unfortunately is an empty square, but we did do a 3, so we got to scratch the full 3. Again, another empty square. All right, so those are all completely empty, which means it's definitely in this next column. We still have one action left that we can take. And colony is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 letters long. So we actually are going to use both the 5 and the 2. I told you we're allowed to cross over. So we will L-O-N-Y do that. And then we will continue that like this. Except I'm going to go in the opposite direction because I know what the stuff is below. And if for some reason that top space is a skull or something else, then I won't be able to scratch the rest, and that would be a problem. So we're going to scratch from the bottom up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 spaces. I'm going to start here, which is surprisingly blank, which means it's very likely we've got C-O-L-O-N-Y in the opposite direction, in which case I am glad that I scratched off more than I needed to, because I do get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I should be able to find the word. So let me go ahead and continue scratching. All right, there is my C, so I'm going to go ahead and finish out the rest of the word, and we'll come back. All right, so there we see colony again with the straight line at the top and the bottom. Straight line means we've unlocked a new card, so we're looking for card C-O-L, which is here, C-O-L, and it says, a massive wild hive made up of thousands of cells hangs from a sequoia tree. You can hear the buzz of a honeybee emitting from every alcove of the structure. Amongst this noise, you can just make out the signature sound of Hexa. You'll recognize her by the bracelet fastened around her leg, and you'll finally be able to take flight. So we've got 2 new words, honeybee, which we saw before, but now it says that it's connected to this word colony, and bracelet, which is not connected to the word colony. And now we've got this down here, main quest. We've got a new extension of our quest. It says I have to find the words honeybee and bracelet on the grid of destiny. And when I do, I'm going to scratch off the lock symbol and take card Z020. So let's set that down here. Dwelling's not important anymore. It doesn't go away. But the only other word we haven't found on there is honeybee, and that's already listed on colony. And this is our quest. So once I've found honeybee and bracelet, I will scratch off all of these lock symbols. But for right now, I need to find honeybee because that's the only one that's connected to where I am right now. The problem is I'm out of actions. So when this happens, in order to take our next action, we need to reset. And when we reset, you can see here, the icon says move everything up to the top and scratch off 1 hourglass. So I'm going to scratch off the first hourglass in our line of tragedy down here. Again, it's a little bit tricky to see, but you can see a -1 and this sort of action tile symbol. So what that means is I'm going to take my largest action tile and get rid of it and replace it with one that has 1 fewer square. So we are going to lose our 5, and instead we'll get another 4 in its place. And then everything resets. And now we're looking for honeybee. It could be off the Y. I see an H-O here, but we already know there's dead space there, so it's not that. And also the H is not the start of a word, so it can't be there. It has to come off of colony. So it could be H-O off of this O in either direction. It could be the N in the middle of honeybee going in either direction, or it could be this Y going in either direction. So we've got to sort of take a stab in the dark here. And I'm going to gamble on the N. Now, I know I only have 4 and 4 now, and honeybee is an 8-letter word. So I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to use a 4, and I'm going to cross the N, because that way we can find out which direction the word is going to if this is where it is. So we're going to place it 2 spaces to the left of N and 1 to the right, and I'm scratching from left to right. Put that there, and we'll go ahead and scratch. All right, so we found the Y, which means honeybee is going to the left, assuming that that's the right word, but let's scratch the next letter and see if we get the E. And yes, there is the E. We played the 4, so I've got 1, 2, 3, one more block to scratch, and that gets me the O. The problem here now becomes there's one letter here, and there's 3 letters here, but because they're not connected, I can't use 2 action tiles on the same turn. So I'm going to have to take 2 actions, one to find the first letter, and one to find the final 3 letters. All right, so I did just pause for a second. You may have seen something shift. I just cut out a piece of cardboard to put behind this. I think that it might help with the scratching. My mat's a little bit squishy, so we're going to see if that helps moving forward with scratching. Now we're going to just take the 1 space action to take that H in front of honey. So let me go ahead and do that now. All right, so that is the H as expected. And now we need to find B, so we're going to take the 3 space action. I'm pretty sure that this is B, so I'm just going to go through it quickly. There's an E, another E. I'm sorry, the B, E, E. Let me just clean that up. Now, interestingly, that honeybee has a curved bracket or a curly bracket at the end, which means that's not unlocking a new card or any more story. It's going to work towards my powers, but we don't have any H's. I can cross off 1 O here. Don't have any N, no E, no Y, no B, no E, no E. So just that O. And we're still searching for a bracelet. But we don't have any starts or finishes of any new words. So it's going to have to come off of one of these letters in honeybee, because we know for sure that it doesn't intersect with colony. And this B is not going to work. B-R-A-C-E, that doesn't work. Means it's got to be below one of these E's, with the T coming off of the top of one of them. Or, actually that's not true, it could be L-E-T coming off the top of it. So I'm going to use a 4 action for my final action this round and go down. Now which E do I want to go down from? Let's go down from the E at the end over here. We're going to scratch the 4 squares below that E. And that gets me an L. Okay, so that is going to be L-E-T, assuming that this is bracelet. So let's continue scratching that. There's my E. And we got 2 more. The C, and 1 more. The A. So we do need a B, R down here, and there will be a T at the top. But that's the end of our 4 actions. So again, we need to reset, scratching off the next hourglass at the top, which this time is a red version of what we saw before. This is a -2. So we're going to get rid of the biggest one we have and drop it down by 2. It means one of these 4s is going to go away, and we'll replace it with a 2, and then everything gets reset. And we will play one of those 2s now to get that BR in bracelet, which you can see now has a curled bracket at the end. So this is just going to unlock things on here when we finish this, but we'll do the last single action to finish that with our T at the top here. And sure enough, that T at the top does have a straight line, so that is the end of the word. We've discovered bracelet. So the first thing is, this is one of our power words, so we're going to cross off. I don't have any B's. I do have an R and adroit. No A. C, no. E, we've done already. L, there's lots of L's in skillful. We'll cross off one of those L's in skillful. Another E, nothing, and a T. We'll take that T in adroit. Now, we've just finished that quest from the card over here that told us once we found honeybee and bracelet on the grid of destiny, scratch off the locks and take card Z020. So we're going to scratch off all these locks. And we will take card Z020. So first, looking at card Z0, T0, which actually is the next card we should have taken anyway, because following the normal rules, we've just uncovered the word voyage. And this now says voyage. And it says, you found Hexa. She climbs out of her hole, and having saddled her, you finally take off. Perched high in the sky, the moon greets you majestically. Suddenly, you feel Hexa stiffen as if overcome with panic. A short distance away at the foot of an old nut tree, you spy a prostrate form. You believe it to be serving your secret heart's desire. Nearby, an imposing winged creature is giving the coup de grace to the young man's beetle. Now more than ever, you must use caution. All right. Then, it says down here, reminder. In order to scratch off squares after this word, you must move at least one hero into the green zone. Scratch off one time for each hero move. You'll notice, at least I hope you'll notice, because this board, again, is a little bit tough today, that these letters are green and not blue like the other words we've been scratching off. And what that means now is that we're going to need to move to the green zone in order to scratch those off. And to do that, you'll see marked here, movement also costs one time. So if I want to scratch off anything starting from this word voyage, which we're looking for a nut tree, we're going to need to move to green. Now, if that had been intersecting a blue word, we could stay in the blue zone as long as our starting word was a blue word. But in this case, we have to scratch from this green one, so we will need to move from the blue zone into the green zone. And again, to do that, we will need to scratch off one more timer. And here you'll see a new icon. This icon here shows a sort of broken action zone. It's that square shape or that rectangle shape is the shape of one of these blocks. So we're actually going to be decreased now to only having access to 3 of those. So we're going to place one of these in one of those slots, and now we can't do anything more with that. Now we need to find nut tree. So we need to find N-U-T-T-R-E-E. That means it has to come off of this E. And N-U-T-T, yeah, it can't go that way. It must be going the other way. I don't know if this is the first E or the second E, but if this is the first E, then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 going that way. In any case, we're going to need to come back the other way. So I'm going to scratch 4 this way from left to right and hope that we find T-R-E-E. And let's see what happens. We start with the left spot. And actually, I just realized that's not true. We do have to start scratching from the space that's adjacent to the word and then go to the other spot. So I'm going to start here because I know that this side is safe. So we'll scratch 1 there. And I found an R there, so it looks like I did well. So I'm going to go ahead and scratch the other 2 spots, which does give me the rest of the word tree and the bar at the end that shows me that is the end of the word. We are out of actions though. So we will need to scratch off one more timer, which lucky enough for me is empty. So these all get reset. I need to find nut, N-U-T, but there is definitely a space between the 2 T's, so that is 4. So we're going to play a 4 action on this side, N-U-T, and a space. That'll go there, and we'll do that. And there is our nut tree. That's a straight line at both sides, so we will find the next card, which should be card N-U-T. And here is card nut, which says nut tree. You crash land in front of the tree. Luckily, Servant appears to be simply unconscious. Your stomach drops as you recognize the Grim Reaper, the Hornet, mere meters away. She tears apart a little coleopter, but it will soon turn towards you. You know without a doubt that it will decapitate Hexa and then kill you. Why the devil didn't Servant use his saber to exterminate the beast? All right, we've got a new main quest. It says find the Hornet on the grid of destiny to move to the next stop or step. But we've got two words now. Hornet intersects here and saber that doesn't intersect with nut tree. But saber looks like it might be something that will help me fight the hornet. So I'm going to try and find the saber before I find the hornet. We know that it doesn't connect to nut tree. It means it's got to come off of this A. And I know that means the S is on one side of the A or the other. So I'm going to play a 3 action across the A to figure that out. And we will scratch starting with the right side. All right. And the right side is the B, so we're going to scratch the other side, which now is definitely going to be the S. Well, assuming that it's the right word anyway. Yeah, sure enough, there's the S. And S is a straight line. We need to find the ER now, so I will play a 2 action on the other side to find that ER. Scratching from the E first, because it needs to be the space that's adjacent to the starting word. There's my E. And the R for saber, and you will see that's a straight line. So we do get a new card from that, S-A-B. There's my card, S-A-B. We flip that over, it says, saber. Near the tree, a glimmering object suddenly catches your eye. In its scabbard of braided matting lies the Damascus steel blade that Servan's family has passed down from generation to generation. Crafted by his great-grandfather, a master blacksmith, it has already helped each of its holders out of many a bind. But is it prudent to turn your back at such a critical moment? So I get to choose now. I can scratch off 1 time to add this saber to the inventory, or I'm going to discard this saber. I think that it's important. It's a weapon. I'm going to keep it. So I'm going to scratch off 1 time to keep that and add it to my inventory. So scratch off 1 more time, which is another -1. So we are going to lose that 4 and replace it with a 3. But now I get to add the saber to my inventory. So I'm going to flip this over to the other side. And in my inventory, I will give it the saber, which is card S-A-B. Although I notice at the bottom of the card it says 18, so I'm not sure if that's supposed to be S-A-B or 18, so I will write both just in case for future reference. Now, we are still searching for the hornet that must come off of the nut tree. It's not going to be the R, for sure, because the S is in the way. So it's going to be off this T, or this N. And I've been doing my best to keep away from other words. I don't know if that's important or not important, but I'm going to aim for this N over here. But again, we're out of actions. So I'm going to cross off 1 more timer, which is not a good thing because that's another -2 for me. So I'm going to lose 1 of these 3s and get a 1. So we've got 2 2s, 2 1s, and a 3 to find the hornet. Yeah. Well, let's just use a 2 and we're going to go, I'm going to assume it's going down on the thing. So I'm going to put these 2 here and we'll scratch down. This could be a problem. No, I'm doing 3 because then if it's H-O-R, that's great. If it's E-T something, that something's not going to be a big deal unless it's a skull. I really hope it's not a skull. All right, so it is the E. So we do have 1 extra something. Let's hope it's an empty space or a hand so that I don't get in trouble for scratching. There's my T. And I do get lucky because that bottom one is empty. Yay. So we know that H-O-R is up. So I'll play a 3 and scratch up. And there is the H. So that's H-O-R-N-E-T. Straight lines on both sides means we do take out the H-O-R card. Here. Hornet. And here we go. It says, I have claws, but I have no feet. With me, you can make a steady beat. To make or break, you must choose boards, blocks, pianos, or even horseshoes. From the smallest tap to mighty thunder, there's not much that I can't break asunder. All right. So this says it's required I have to solve this challenge immediately. If I have card 18 in the inventory, I get to scratch off the arrow box of 014 on the challenge gateway. Well, we did pick up card 18. That's the saber that I wanted to get so badly. So let's see what happens. This is our first challenge. And a challenge card is going to get you one of these challenge gateways. And underneath these blocks here is some kind of keyword that I have to figure out what it is. And the way this is going to work is reading the challenge that I just got, I have to guess a word that answers that riddle. And I'm going to guess it, and I'm going to start scratching letters from left to right until a letter doesn't match the word that I said. And as soon as I hit a letter that doesn't match the word that I said, I pause and I scratch off one of these question marks at random, and that could give me some kind of negative effect for doing so. Also, if I ever want a hint for the answer, I can choose to scratch off these hints. But when I scratch off a hint, I will also need to scratch off one of these questions, again, potentially getting some kind of negative for doing so. And then if I successfully, or when I successfully figure out the answer, I will scratch off this bottom space to find out what happens from that challenge. Now, because I have the saber, it says I get to scratch off this first square. So let's go ahead and do that first. Ah, perfect. Okay, good. Now you can see what the cards are supposed to look like because that one scratched off perfectly well. I'm sorry that this tutorial card is no good. The first one that I used was not a problem at all, and you can see here clearly now that this one is also not a problem. So we've got a word that starts with an H. And again, we read this. It says, I have claws, but no feet. You can make a steady beat. To make or break, choose boards, blocks, pianos, or even horseshoes. From the smallest tap to the mighty thunder, there's not much I can't break. So it's got claws, it can break, and it can make a beat. Beginning with an H, I'm going to think that it's a hammer, right? A hammer has a claw hammer. Clearly no feet. I can break things with a hammer, I can make things with a hammer. Boards and blocks are certainly things I use a hammer. Pianos have hammers that hit the string. And a horseshoe, I need a hammer to put the horseshoe on. So I'm going to guess hammer. And again, we'll start scratching. That's H. The next letter then is A. All right, so it looks like we're okay. There's the M. Another M. E. And finally R. Yeah, this is scratching much, much cleaner. This is what they should be doing, and you can see that's a whole lot faster and a whole lot cleaner than what we've been doing. That says hammer. I was correct, so we're going to scratch off the bottom to see what we get from that. And that card says Z98. So let's pick out Z98 right here. We flip that over. Oh, and we've finished our tutorial. It says epilogue. In a sudden burst of bravery, you jump on Hexa and you hammer yourself against the hornet, delivering a mighty blow. Stunned by the shock, the creature falters. Sirven is slowly reviving and seems a bit embarrassed to have been rescued by his friend. His voice falters when he says Iria's name, but there's no time for banter. You help him onto the saddle and take flight towards the city of Kel just before night falls. So main quest 3 of 3 says required, take card A6 and A8, and then calculate my utopian points. So cards A6 and A8 are the last two cards from the tutorial. And you'll see that's our new character, Sirven, and his power card, just like we had for Iria. So that there is the end of the tutorial. At the end of each chapter, in this case the tutorial, we are going to add up our points. You'll see here we get 3 points for finishing the tutorial. I do get +1 point because we didn't find any skulls. I get +1 more point, you can see here, because we didn't cross off any question marks in that grid during our challenge. And then this is a list of any dystopian points. Dystopian points would give you minus points. And those are going to be coming from sometimes uncovering them in the question mark blocks on a challenge, or if the timer runs out and you continue playing, you're going to generate or gather dystopian points. So in this case, I didn't get any skulls, so I get 1 point for that. I didn't get any question marks, so I get 1 point for that. And then finally, I didn't get any dystopian points here, so we do score a perfect score of 5 out of 5. So that is the tutorial. I'm not going to actually go into the prologue this time because I did get to show you quite a bit in this tutorial. And I don't think that there's much that I need to show you in the prologue, and I'd rather not spoil any more of the game for you if possible. While we're here, basically all of the components, as I mentioned, are prototypes, so I can't really talk too much about them. You saw I did struggle with scratching on this board, but I think this is a bad board because as you saw, this one scratched perfectly easily. And I can show you right now, if I scratch off one of those question blocks, it's simply just a push across the board and it's completely scratched off. It should be super easy. This tool fits the squares perfectly and it should scratch them very easily without any problems. So that was just a fluke that this card had something wrong with it. And again, I do apologize for that, but we can't judge the final copy of the game on the prototype components because clearly there was something wrong with that board. I do want to show you, just for reference, though I'm not going to play the prologue, this is the card for the prologue, which looks very similar to what we just did now. But in the full version of the game, there will be 5 chapters beyond the prologue, and those chapters are actually going to be a grid that looks like this. This is not a scratchable grid, this is just a sample of what the grids are going to look like, but they, you can see, are much bigger. There's going to be a whole lot more going on in the game than just what's in the tutorial and the prologue. You'll see there's a story, lots of space for inventory, lots of space for heroes. Moving forward, you will get to start choosing which heroes you get or use for each chapter. Also, you saw that my scorecard was just here on the back of this individual challenge gateway for the tutorial, but in the actual game, you'll see that those challenge gateways all sort of exist on this big board. And that score sheet is a big score sheet that you're keeping track of your progress through the entire story. And then also with a note section down here for any notes you might want to take that help you figure out puzzles or search for things later on in the game. Beyond that, there's not a whole lot to talk about except that. I hope you can see my table right now. And you can even see the almost perfect outline of where the card was. I can't comment on the component quality because obviously it's not finished components, but this is a scratch-off game. And there's one thing that I do want to point out while we are here looking at the components, and that is this. This is a very messy game, and you should know that going in. I'm not going to condemn the game based on the scratching, but these are single use because there's no way to recover them, so that is trash now. And I did make quite a bit of mess from the scratching off. So if that is something that bothers you, definitely you should know that this is a one-time use kind of game, although you will be able to buy sort of refresh packs so that you could play again. There are apparently several different endings. I'll talk more about this in my final thoughts, but you will need a refresh pack to play through. And again, you are creating some trash. You are creating quite a bit of mess, but that's that. With that said, meet me back up top and I'll let you know what I think about the prologue that I've played through and then sort of how I feel about the game in general. Sorry, real quick, there is one more thing that I should show you about components. Because the game does offer a nice save system, I showed you that some of the later chapters, or all of the later chapters, are going to be much bigger boards, which means you might not finish them in one session. So the very nice thing about this game, you already saw this box here. And this box actually functions as a save system for the cards. For example, if we had only finished half of this current chapter, we could have put all of the cards that we hadn't discovered yet on one side of this divider, all of the cards that we had discovered on the other side of the divider, and slide them in the box like that. So next time we can pull them out and simply already have those separated from those, and we could continue where we left off. Same thing with the characters. We can take our character board as is and place our character cards on top of that. And the game comes with another box here that all of the character boards go into. So you could do the same thing for each of these character boards, preserving exactly what that board looked like at that time, meaning even keeping all of the action tokens in their current locations, and then all of those get slotted back into that box like this, And the next time, all I need to do is pull those out, and they're all set up for the next game. Just wanted to show you that before I disappear, but meet me back up top, and I'll let you know what I think of the game itself. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the playthrough, and more importantly, I hope that that playthrough was good enough to sort of give you a good feeling of how the game plays out. I did only show you the tutorial in this video. I would have liked to have shown you the prologue, but I feel like you got to see most of the mechanisms and how the game plays in that tutorial, so I'd rather not spoil any of the actual content from the game that's going to be coming out in the future, so that you can experience that and explore that and solve the puzzles and challenges and so on your own when you get the game. If you get the game. That said, let's talk a little bit about how I feel about the game. But before we do that, I do want to mention one small mechanism that I didn't point out while I was playing the game. And that is, in a lot of the story cards that I was drawing as I played, in the top left corner, sometimes you might see a little curly bracket, or you might see one of those skull symbols. And these are sort of warnings or hints that these kinds of things might exist close to the word that activated that story card. So if you see a skull, you might want to be extra careful because it's likely that there might be one of those skull symbols hidden somewhere. If you see one of those curly brackets, it's likely that one of the words on that card is going to activate or give you the letters to activate some of those powers on your player board. So let's talk about how this game plays out. This game is basically, I don't want to say choose your own adventure because you're not choosing too much, although I'll talk about that because you do sort of as you get further into it. But this game is very much a story narrative game that you're basically working your way through a not linear but fairly linear story as you're playing through the game. And in order to do that, the main mechanism here is this word search mechanism, right? You're constantly using your actions to scratch off spaces on the board to find keywords that you've been sort of hinted at or pushed at going or looking for that are somewhere on that card. And you're always sort of building out in a network from other words that you've already found to discover new words. And sometimes these new words unlock powers for your character, and sometimes these new words get you further progression in the story. And you'll see this didn't happen in the tutorial, but as I got into the prologue, there is quite a bit of branching in that some of these story cards will have multiple words, and those multiple words will sort of have multiple words, and they're all sort of branching out onto their own paths. So it might be that if you follow one path, you're following the sort of main through story of the narrative. But if you branch off into some of these other paths, you might find items that make things easier or that change up the story in different ways. You might find characters that because you've interacted with now, make other things happen differently later on. And there are definitely cards that came out in the prologue that said, if you have this card or if you've seen this card, do this right now instead of what you're planning to do or what should be normally done on the card. So there's definitely some branching, there's definitely some connection between what you've done in the past and what's coming next. And there's definitely some choice that you may not have seen in the tutorial because you did see the blue and the green zones and I had to switch zones to find words in the different color zones. In the prologue there were three, there was a blue, a green, and a red zone. And they came out in different unique ways throughout the play. And I had two characters in the prologue, so it made it to the point where I could sort of send one character off into a different colored zone and keep the other guy in the main blue zone, and then eventually they transitioned to the red zone and the one from the green zone came to join them in the red zone as for this sort of end game build-up kind of story. And it was really cool to see how you had different characters following different paths because it really did feel like that in the story. It did really feel like there were multiple things happening in the story at the same time, and the different characters were exploring in different places. Now, I did only manage to, by the end of the prologue, to unlock one of the powers, and the power that I unlocked was nice because it actually allowed me to ignore one of the skull symbols if I found it while I was doing an action. But I didn't really get a chance to dig too far in because that's all we get in this prototype is the prologue. So I can't really speak to how varied the different characters will feel as they are progressing and whether it matters how much if I send one character this way or one character that way, or if these characters should stay together but that character should split off on his own. And those variable powers that they get from those sheets might mean something, right? I also started picking up items, and because I had items, different things happened. So there's definitely some more to the system, more to the story, more to the sort of branching feel of the narrative that I haven't seen yet. But I will say that more than what I saw in the tutorial, the prologue definitely has me excited for those kinds of sort of expansion of the story as it sort of widens out and fills the world and isn't just a sort of linear narrative through the story. So that was very, very pleasing to me. The other thing that you didn't really see in the tutorial that I did run into quite a bit in the prologue is sort of the push your luck piece of this word search mechanism and those skull symbols. I didn't get any skull symbols in the tutorial, and that was good for me, but maybe not so great for you watching because you didn't get a chance to see that kind of risk factor, but it's definitely there. When I was playing in the prologue, I'd get a letter that I knew was somewhere in the middle of a word, so I wanted to explore before and after the word to try and figure out which direction that word was going, whether up or down or left and right. And sometimes I would overshoot by just one square based using those action strips, I guess you call them. And I overshot in one direction or the other by one square because of where I laid it down. Because I wanted to find out a little bit of both directions, and I wasn't sure which way the word was going, and I thought maybe I knew what I was doing, and I just sort of over-pushed myself or over-exerted myself and did go one square beyond the word. And sometimes it was blank and nothing happened. But I did end up hitting 3, maybe 4 skulls in that prologue play because of these times when I pushed my luck to try and hit a word and just went a little bit too far and triggered one of those skulls. So they're really more important than they felt like they were in the tutorial because you really do have to constantly be assessing whether or not it's worth pushing a little bit further to try and find something, or whether you want to be a little bit more sort of risk averse and take a few more actions to get where you're going. But remember that everything is on a timer, and every time you reset your action, that timer is hurting you, right? It's making your actions less important or less effective, basically. And there are certain things in there that trigger along the way that do sort of push you further along the story if you haven't gotten there. There was an icon in the prologue that when I scratched off that spot, it pulled out a card that said, somebody's yelling at you because you haven't done what you were supposed to do yet. However, I was lucky that it said, if you have an item, skip this card. So there really is this sense of the world is moving on with or without you, and you've got a certain amount of time to get things done. It's not going to kick you out of the game, but it definitely will punish you for taking too long exploring the side quests while you should be focusing on saving this person or finishing whatever the mission is. And I thought that was really, really cool. Also, there were some times where I extended beyond something a little bit and I hit a letter that was of a different color or just a different word that did have a line on one edge, which means, oh my goodness, I found a word that's not one of the keywords on my card. It might be a keyword on a card I find later, but I just stumbled on something just through happenstance and through exploration. And that felt really cool too, because in the real world, if I'm off doing a mission and I'm searching for a specific thing, but along the way I notice something off to the side, that might be something that happens in a real exploration, right? Oh, what's that over there? Let me go check that out for a second, and then I'll come back to what I was doing. So that idea that I just happened to stumble upon letters that then connected to other words that I wasn't even searching for was actually pretty cool to me, and I enjoyed that. Now, keeping in mind, this is all still on those skinny strips of grid, right? You saw the tutorial grid. I showed you the example or the prologue grid that I was going to be using, and they're pretty small. And then I showed you the sample of what a full-size, like chapter 1 grid looks like, and they're way bigger. So all of these things, all of this push your luck, all of this exploration, all of this discovery that happens in this little strip has got to be even more interesting and impressive and so on as you get into these bigger grids. There's more foreboding danger, but there's also the ability to find more stuff when you're exploring. And that's really cool to me. And the way that items work is really cool to me. And I just felt after the tutorial like, this is kind of cool, but I don't know about this. I'm not fully in. But by the time I got through the prologue, the story had picked up. There was these branching narratives. There were items that I was using to solve things or to change things or to do things differently. There was just more life to the game that excited me. Do I go this way? Do I do that way? Do I do this now? Do I wait and do it later? Do I forget about that so I can focus on rushing through the main thing? There's a lot of stuff going on in here, and I really, really, really enjoyed all of that. So I'm excited to see more of what this system can do. I also discovered at the end of the prologue, I got a card that says, you've unlocked a mission, which is not one of the main mission pieces that I was aimed on. Now, granted, that happened at the end of the prologue, so I can't find out what that is until the game comes out in the future. But it's very interesting to me that along the way, not only am I following these branching paths, I'm going to unlock missions that are completely unrelated, or not unrelated, but sort of side quests to the main thing that I'm doing. So not only am I discovering random things along the way, I'm also discovering new quests that I should potentially divert my attention to get other items, or to find new characters, or to get new powers, or whatever it is to push me through this story. And to see all of this happening through this sort of interesting word-based, word puzzle, word search kind of mechanism is very refreshing, because it's not something I've ever seen before, and it's certainly something I'm interested in seeing more. I can't say that it's mind-blowing, I can't say this is the best thing I've ever seen before, but because this is new, and because I enjoy the word search piece, and because the story was getting more and more interesting, this is definitely something I want to follow through on. If there's anything negative I want to say about the game, it is the wastefulness, it is the mess. I showed you that already with the components overview. But the other thing is, at least in the first two pieces that I saw in the tutorial and the prologue, the puzzles. I showed you the challenge at the end of the tutorial where I solved the answer was hammer. There was another one in the prologue, and I solved it instantly without really any thought, without needing any hints, without even considering any hints. And it might just be that the puzzle clicked well with me and it worked well with me, and that's why I figured it out so easily. But I am a little bit concerned, based on what I've seen in the first two puzzles, that some of these challenges may not be all that challenging, but the game is still a whole lot of fun, and this ultimately isn't an escape room super puzzle kind of game, so I don't know how much that bothers me. All this said, this is a preview copy, or a prototype copy of a preview of a game coming to Kickstarter. From what I've seen, I'm intrigued, and that's all that I can say so far, because I haven't seen more to say whether or not it's worth the money, or worth the effort, or anything else. I just know that what I saw, especially from the prologue piece, shows me that the story is interesting, the mechanisms are at least interesting enough to push me to explore and find out more. This is definitely a campaign I'm going to be keeping my eye on. And I would definitely recommend, if you're a fan of narrative story kind of campaign games that are sort of mechanism light and story heavy, and you are sort of interested in this word search scratch off kind of puzzle as a unique new mechanism, definitely check out this campaign. I will put a link down below. If you catch this before the campaign goes live, you can click that link to check out the preview page. Otherwise, go check out the page, and if it looks like something you're interested in, definitely throw some money their way and pick up a copy for yourself. I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, if you did, please remember to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon below, and I'll see you all next time. Thanks.